After using the Canon R6V every single day for the last 10 days, I kept coming back to the same exact thought. Did Canon accidentally create their best value video camera in their lineup? For just $2,500, you're getting features that you normally would see in sort of their cinema line. Things like 7K RAW internal recording, C-Log 2 for better dynamic range, open gate recording, IBIS for smoother handheld filming, and an internal fan for longer record times and reliability. If I was starting my filmmaking career today, this would absolutely be the first camera I buy. So I want to share my first impressions with the Canon R6V, and quick disclaimer, this won't be a full detailed breakdown or comparison to my Canon C50, although that video is coming. This will cover more the experience of using the Canon R6V in the real world, some of the weird quirks I've found about it, and why I think it's a serious A cam or a great B cam if you already own one of Canon's cinema line cameras. Hi, I'm Bruno Pozo. I'm a commercial filmmaker in Bend, Oregon, and I make weekly videos on filmmaking technique, gear reviews, and how to make money with your camera. If any of that interests you, hit that like and subscribe. Now, onto the video. So when it comes to the experience of using the Canon R6V, I was thoroughly impressed. First off, it is very lightweight. I've been shooting with the Canon C50 for a little while now, and that one, because of its metal body build and a little bit bulkier design, it has some weight to it, whereas this one is super lightweight, which can be a pro or con depending on your needs. The reason it is so lightweight though is because the build of the body is not an aluminum chassis like most of their other cameras. It's actually some sort of plastic. I did find that when I was handling it, I could feel the difference between this and things like my R5 Mark II and the Canon C50. But that's sort of expected at this price point since they are cheaper than the R6 III and the C50, so they did have to cut some sort of cost on their end. I love the textured grip on the handle and the body's design. Coming from the C50, it is very similar. However, there are some key differences like the power switch, the mode dial, and their updated camera wheel at the back that now also functions as a D-pad. So you actually can hotkey that to different functions. On that note, I appreciate that basically all of the buttons on this camera are customizable in the camera's menu. And you can have one set of custom buttons for photo and another set for video. The only thing I was sort of sad to see missing on this camera body's design is the button on the front next to the lens. They have one on the bottom left corner where the record button is, but there's usually one on the other side where your grip is, and that one has been my default for zebra. And so to see that gone was a little sad, but at least the zebra is now defaulted to that D-pad on the back. The video quality of this camera is superb. Because it has the exact same sensor as the R6 III and the C50, you do get a very similar image out of it. I do notice a small difference between the Canon Cinema line Color Science and the mirrorless line of Color Science, but it's really not that hard to match them in post. You can record 4K up to 120, but only up to 60 frames per second is it going to be oversampled. And if you really want to squeeze the most out of this camera, you can shoot 7K RAW up to 60 frames per second. I did this for my most recent trip to Portland, and the image is absolutely gorgeous. I love their natural color science. It's very easy to grade, and you can enable proxies so that when you go to edit, you can edit those proxies, and then when it's time to do those final touches and color grading, you can use those raw files and have an seamless editing workflow. I wasn't sure how to feel about the IBIS at first because I had grown accustomed to not having IBIS on the C50. Most of my lenses do have optical image stabilization built into them, and I've found that that's been more than enough to help reduce at least the jitters. You might still get some of those rockier movements, but I was willing to make that compromise. However, I'm actually kind of impressed with the IBIS on this. You can see in this walking shot how the IBIS and the lens optical image stabilization work together to make a really smooth shot, even on uneven terrain. This is great news for any of you run and gun shooters who don't have the luxury or want to use a gimbal to get steady handheld footage. It's also really nice because IBIS does allow you to use some of Canon's lenses that don't have optical image stabilization and still get a very smooth result out of them. So things like my 28-70 f2 and any of their VCM lenses. In this camera, you do only have the one operating system, so you're not having the cinema operating system for video and a separate photo operating system. It's all the photo operating system, which is something I'm more comfortable with, although I've now come to appreciate the cinema line operating system. But I do miss the mirrorless menu sometimes, and so this felt like a nice return to that, and I find it to be much more simpler, easier to follow. There are some things you'll have to learn because the menu has now expanded to take on all the extra features that this camera has to offer. You do have a dual base ISO in this camera, although you can't select it individually like you can on the C50, but on C-Log 2, you have the base at 800, and as you'll see when you jump to 6400, it cleans up a bit and you get really nice low light performance. In some of the interior shots at the zoo, even while I'm shooting in RAW, which doesn't do any noise reduction inside the camera, you get really clean results. And I was shooting at 12,800 at times, and for this shot with the bats at 25,600. Lastly, I love that this camera has an internal fan. Even on my R5 Mark II without the fan grip, the camera was pretty susceptible to overheating. It might be just where I live in Central Oregon, which can get pretty hot, especially during the summer months, but I've had it get really close to overheating and sometimes even overheating with the fan on. However, that hasn't been the case yet with the Canon R6V. And I appreciate that I don't have to buy an external grip to get the luxury of having a fan to cool my camera. It's built right in. And so if you want a more reliable camera and you do longer shoots like podcasts or presentations, things of that nature, the R6V is definitely the right choice over the R6 Mark III. And lastly, the photos are really good. Sure, you don't have a mechanical shutter, but that hasn't been an issue for me. I know you can run into banding and internal lights and things like that. But if you're shooting outdoors or if you have plenty of light, or if you use the high frequency mode to avoid the banding, the electronic shutter is more than enough. And honestly, I don't notice that much of a difference between this and my R5 Mark II in mechanical shutter. But there were a few quirks I found with the camera. The first one was the buttons when I first got it didn't quite work immediately. And what I mean is I would press it and it wouldn't register that I pressed it. So I would press it again and then it would work. I think that just might've been the stiffness of the camera or something like that, because over time that's sort of been less happening. That's been happening less, I mean. But it still is like every now and then I press the 5 button on the side where I have my false color hotkeyed and it just won't activate unless I get in a specific angle. And so that's just something that I thought was a little strange. Also, the plastic build does make the camera feel a little bit cheaper. It doesn't affect the performance, at least not to my knowledge, but it does make me wary about, dropping it or how I manage it. And I do think that the plastic feel being lightweight can sometimes add more jitter to your footage, but with the IBIS, it should be all right. I already bought a cage for it, and so I'm not worried about this thing falling over and breaking, but the plastic build was something I did notice. And of course, this camera doesn't have that mechanical shutter or viewfinder. And so as a photo camera, this really is more of a backup than something you want as your primary. It goes without saying, but this is clearly a video first camera with the options to take photos. And so if you want a viewfinder and you need that for your workflow, or if you do mainly photos, obviously this is not the right camera for you. You would be better off with the R6 III and you'll still get basically the same video performance just without the reliability. And so this is why the R6V is such a great pair with my Canon C50. They both share the exact same sensor and similar build and design. So it's very easy for me to hop from operating one camera to the other. In the few test shots here, you can see how similar the images are between the C50 and the R6V. And because the R6V does have that IBIS built in, it makes it a much better social media camera. I do some social media client work here, and so having that extra IBIS for a smoother handheld experience while I'm doing those is really appreciated. I even appreciate how the LCD auto rotates when you put this camera into vertical orientation. On the C50, you have to actually rotate the screen manually in the settings, and I find that a bit annoying. I just wish it knew based on the orientation that I was holding the camera in. And I really appreciate that the R6V switching between photo and video is instant. So if I ever do need to grab a quick photo or two, it's not gonna take me that 3 to 4 second delay that I have on the Canon C50. However, I have noticed that on the latest update to the Canon C50 that just came out at the end of June, my C50 actually seems to switch faster between photo and video mode, but it's nowhere near instant like you get on the R6V. And so if you really want that reliability and the ability to switch very quickly, the R6V is great for that. So the R6V is an incredibly capable camera at an incredibly affordable price. I remember I bought the Canon R6 like 5-6 years ago at $2,500, and that one didn't even have C-Log 2. It had C-Log 1 and then eventually C-Log 3. It was susceptible to overheating, especially when you go to 4K 60, and it didn't have a CF Express card or internal RAW recording. So to go from that to the R6V, where you're getting that internal RAW recording, that CF Express card for better video performance and transfer speeds, an internal fan for more reliability and less likelihood of overheating. So this is a great camera, even for beginners and professionals. As a beginner, you get access to a ton of great features, and eventually you can grow into the camera as your career grows. And if you're already a professional like myself, this is a great, capable camera with amazing performance and specs at an affordable price if you need a B or even C cam. So what are your thoughts on the Canon R6V? And if you have any questions on it, I'll be making a ton of videos on this camera, and so I'd be happy to add it to my list. Just let me know in the comment section below. If you want to see my long-term review of the Canon C50, you can check it out here. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I appreciate every single one of you who do, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace.